So the first lifeboat then was developed in 1809. What came after that?
Nothing until 1840s. In the 1840s, again, there was a loss of life in shipwrecks, and there was primarily from the insurance companies, so there was clamoring that the federal government needs to do something with this loss of life. If you can imagine Interstate 95 today being 20 miles offshore, and all of your bulk cargo was carried from Maine to Florida, 20 miles offshore, in coastal sailing vessels, primarily lumber and coal. Lumber going south, coal coming north. And these ships in the wintertime were on a lee shore pretty much all the way up, heavily loaded, undermanned, and not the best of construction. Again, money. So these ships coming into the major ports of Boston and New York and Philadelphia would end up being wrecked on the coastlines. And people finally said something has to be done. I have a letter from Governor Rodman Price of New Jersey writing to the New York Board of Underwriters saying that the poor people of Long Beach Island in New Jersey have to bury these bodies at their own cost. That should be the cost of the whole country, not these poor fishermen on Long Beach Island. So in 1848 and 49, Congress appropriated some money, $10,000, for the establishment of something to do with life saving. Well, the federal didn't do too much, so they gave the $10,000 to the National Humane Society, who then built some more real surf boats rather than lifeboats. The second appropriation, they finally did establish some life-saving stations along the Long Island coast and the New Jersey coast. They were volunteer, as the National Humane Society was, and they were equipped with a surf boat. They were equipped with a line-throwing mortar and some other basic supplies. A list of instructions was made up, and it was handed to the next door neighbor, and that was it. Again, it was not a really efficient service. And in 1854-55, they finally tried to get keepers that they would pay, instead of just giving it to somebody next door. Again, the appointment of the keepers became somewhat political, and again, you didn't get really efficiency, although they did save lives. Civil War came, the surf boats, many of them were taken out of these buildings and used in the invasion of Hatteras Island, and the stations were left to ruin. And then in 1871, which by the way is the 150th anniversary now of the U.S. Life Saving Service.
Exactly.
The government totally reorganized the Revenue Cutter Service and established the U.S. Life Saving Service as a much better organized and regulated system. And it became initially under the control of the Revenue Cutter Service. And then as it grew, it broke away, and the head of the Revenue Marine Bureau, Sumner Kimball, became the General Superintendent of the U.S. Life Saving Service, and from 1871 to 1915, it became the premier shore-to-ship rescue organization in the world.
Wow. Can you tell me a little bit about the stations on Cape Cod? How many were there, where they were?
And again, in the 150 years ago, 1871, 1872, Congress appropriated, I think they appropriated $250,000. And some of the first stations to be established were on Cape Cod. There were 9 of them that were established initially in 1872. The first one was Race Point, and then Peaked Hill Bars, and then Highland, Pamet River, Collins Hall, Orleans, Chatham, and Monomoy. Later on,
So all along kind of the back arm of the kind of
correct,
lower and
from
outer Cape.
Provincetown to Monomoy Island, there were stations established within 8 to 9 miles of each other. Later on, they added 4 more stations: Wood End, High Head, Old Harbor, and Monomoy Point. So that was basically the establishment of the U.S. Life Saving Service on Cape Cod. And Cape Cod being we talked before, a lee shore all the way from New York to Maine, and the heavy traffic, and the fact that Cape Cod had a kind of a unique system of bars, shallow bars that were like about 200 yards offshore. And a lot of ships were wrecked. I believe somebody had made an analysis, and if you could lay all the ships that were wrecked on Cape Cod bow to stern, they would stretch all the way to from Race Point to Monomoy without a break. So, and the U.S. Life Saving Service was really, really active on Cape.
So how did it work in terms of identifying ships in distress, or how did that part actually function?
One unique aspect of the U.S. Life Saving Service was known as the Beach Patrol, in which during the hours of darkness and inclement weather, the surfmen from the station would patrol the beach in both directions. And they would meet the surfmen from the adjacent station, or if there wasn't one, there would be an end of their patrol. And they would exchange a little brass token with each surfman with one from the other station, and that would verify the patrol was made. If there wasn't one, like at Race Point initially in the North Patrol, they would come to a post and they would punch a clock to again verify that the patrol was made. And they would be on the outlook for a ship that was in trouble. If they discovered a ship that was in trouble, and usually they could hear it. They could hear the flapping of the sails, which are fairly loud. They would fire a flare called a Costa flare. And that was a really brilliant red light. That would alert the people on board the ship that they had been spotted and that help was on the way. And stay on board your ship. Don't try to come ashore. It also would alert a patrolman, surfman who was on watch at the station. He could see that red light and he knows something was going to be in trouble, and they would alert the crew. So it was a very, very efficient way of identifying that there was a shipwreck. Interestingly, the flare that they fired was almost the same as marine distress flares they have today, and the roadside flare that you see. But I don't think too many people realize that flare was developed and marketed by a woman named Martha Costa.
Oh, and it's named after her now, isn't it?
It is named after her. Unless you want me to, I won't go into a lot of detail.
That's okay.
There's a
We'll
history
do
to
that
say.
in another video.
I wish we had done it in March during the Women's Month because she had quite a history. But anyway, that's how they would discover that there was a ship in distress. In addition, if the surfman saw a ship that was actually standing into danger, he would fire that flare. And again, that would alert the ship that you need to change direction or you're going to be in trouble.
Right.
And there were lots of ships that were saved from destruction because of that patrol and Mrs. Costin's flare.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. So what would happen? Say the flare has been shot. The keeper of that patrol has seen it. He knows that there's a ship out there in distress. What would happen at that point?
He would immediately run back to the station. And I mean run back to the station. That's the point.
And that could be 4 or 5 miles,
That
right?
could be. The first thing the keeper of the station would do would be to alert the adjacent stations that he was proceeding to a wreck. That was required.
How did they do that?
On telephone.
Telephone. Okay.
The stations were not right away, but eventually the stations were connected with a phone line owned by the U.S. Life Saving Service, so that they would have means of communications. They could also communicate with lights, signal lights, and signal flags, but the primary was the telephone. The keeper then make a decision on what initial means of rescue that he would want to try to attempt. I mean, he could certainly see what the condition of the surf was by his station. And he would either haul the surf boat, which was the preferred means of rescue because you could put 6 or 7 people in a surf boat and bring them ashore all at once, a lot easier on everybody. And so he would they would man the surf boat, and they would haul the surf boat to the site of where the ship was stranded, and then they would launch the surf boat through the surf and out to the ship and rescue everybody.
So Richard, how would they get the surf boat from the life-saving station to where it needed to go? Because again, it covered something like 8 miles of beach?
4 miles one way or the other. They would haul the boat by hand. They would have, it was on a wagon with wide iron tires, and there were some line with loops spliced in it. They would put that over their shoulders, and they would haul the boat.
And they would literally pull it themselves
Now,
over the sand.
Most of them figured out fairly quickly that this was not a great idea. And so typically what would happen is that usually the keeper would acquire a horse. And what he would do is he would lease the horse to the government when it was needed to haul the boat. Got a little extra money that way.
Very lucrative.
Very lucrative. Well, how lucrative it was, but it gave him a few extra bucks and made life a lot easier for the surfer.
Well, I would imagine it would. You'd be able to get the boat to wherever it needed to go faster with the horse pulling it.
And a lot easier.
Yeah.
You might want to sometime, if you ever get a chance in a real howling northeaster, go down to an outer Cape beach and start to walk into the wind and see how far you get.
Yeah.
Figure those guys had 3.5 miles more to go than you do.
That's yeah.
When they got to the wreck, they would launch the boat. There was a procedure for launching. They would take the boat off the wagon, and they would bring it down to where the surf was. Now, the keeper, who has been skilled in surf and surf launching, would recognize that the surf kind of runs in threes. You get 3 really big waves, and you get a slightly slack before you get the next big waves. And that was the time, obviously, to launch the boat. Now, the crew would be on either side of the boat, and they would shove it in, and that the keeper would say, now launch. And what he would yell out is, in bows, which means the 2 surfmen in front of the boat would jump in to the bow of the boat, man their oars, and as remaining surfmen began to shove it in, they would hold the boat bow steady to the surf with their oars. And then the keeper would be the last, and he would leap in as the boat was pushed to and the bowmen were rowing. then the balance of the other three would man their oars, and off they would go.
Right, because getting a boat that large with 6 people into the surf is, you can't just go about it willy-nilly. You have to have a set procedure for how that's going to
And the most critical one was the inbows, because those two in the bow, would keep that boat steady into the surf and would give it the momentum in addition to being shoving that the other remaining would. They would give it also some momentum. Mm-hmm. And that was the key to it, is to get it as fast as you could in between that slight slack in the surf between the usual 3 midways and the slack in between. So you had a very short period of time to do it. And they were very skilled at doing it. Now, if the keeper decided that the surf boat was probably not going to be the quickest and most easiest means because of the conditions of the surf, you would then haul out what was called the beach apparatus cart, which was a cart that carried a line-throwing cannon and all the hauling lines and the breeches buoy and the equipment that was necessary to be able to fire a line out to the ship and then haul people from the ship back to shore. And these were the 2 methods of rescue.
Can you talk a little bit about how the line throwing gun worked? Because when I was thinking about this initially, I'm like, how do you, I have a rope, how do I get it to people who are maybe half a mile out? How would that actually function?
Well, the line throwing means was developed in England in the early 1800s, or around 1807, 1808, by a man named Manby. He also developed a whole concept of a life-saving station in that period of time. That's not well known. In fact, a friend of mine and I, we are doing research on that right now. But he developed using a cannon with a cannonball and a ring in the cannonball that could be attached to a line. And it would fire the line out. And it worked. And over the years, these were perfected. Up in 1878, the U.S. Life Saving Service went to the Ordnance Department of the United States Army and said, can you develop us a line throwing cannon that we can get a long distance with and that is fairly easy to carry? Mm-hmm. And a lieutenant in the Ordnance Department named David A. Lyle developed a cannon pretty much similar to a simple cannon, only much smaller, in which they could fire a 18-pound elongated projectile tied to a shot line. These specially made lines out of unbleached linen that were waterproof. And they could get 700 yards maximum under perfect conditions with a number 4 line. There were 3 sizes of lines, 9, 7, and 4. And that's measured by 930 seconds, 730 seconds, and 430 seconds.
Of an inch.
Diameter. Diameter.
So how thick the rope
How
was?
thick the rope. Obviously, the rope along. Yeah. The effective working range and the effective really range in a storm and everything was about 450 yards. So they could get a line on board. They could rig it up. So they would fire the line, and the sailors on board pretty much knew what to do. Mm-hmm. And they would haul that line. And as they hauled it out, they would get a tail block, a block with a line rove through it, and a long line coming off of it that they could tie around something. And there was an instruction board that was attached to that to tell them what to do. And so they would then tie that line to the mast. I would say to the mast or as far up as you can do with the mast are gone. And then they would make a signal to shore that they had done that, and then the surfman on shore would haul out a 3-inch hawser. And there'd be another instruction board on that, and they would make that hawser fast a couple of feet above where they made that tail block fast.
Okay, now you'll have to tell me what a hawser is.
Hawser is just a big, thick rope.
Okay, so they get a
3 inch.
fairly small rope to begin with, but then they haul out a bigger one.
2 bigger ones. They haul out the whip line, is what they call it, which was that line. If you can visualize, some people have on their houses a clothesline, you know, that you can haul back and forth. Well, it's the same as that. And then again, then they will haul out this 3 inch, and that's again not diameter, but in circumference, hawser, and they would make that fast to the mast. And then the surfman would then haul out a breeches buoy on a block that would travel along the hawser. The breeches buoy would hang down, and the breeches buoy is nothing more than a life ring with a pair of pants in it. They would haul that out. The sailor would get into that, and they would be hauled back ashore.
So it's just like a clothesline,
Exactly.
really,
Like
that,
an
and you would haul people across
All
it.
people across. One at a time, they would haul them across it. And it was very efficient. As a matter of fact, there was a complaint filed to the general superintendent in Washington from a sailor that had been shipwrecked on New Jersey that was complaining that when he was hauled ashore, he got his feet wet. I mean, that's seriously, that's how,
Oh, dear.
I mean, this thing was so efficient. They could actually haul these people over the surf. They wouldn't even get their
Oh, my
feet wet.
goodness.
So that's how the line throwing and the breeches buoy worked.
So they did have to practice. Did they have to do a set number of drills a week, or how did that work?
Every day of the week was a drill day. One day they would drill with the surfboat, then they would drill with the breeches buoy, then they would drill with resuscitation of the apparently drowned.
Oh,
Like
goodness.
first aid.
Right, right.
Then they would drill in signaling, the National Code of Signals, so that they could signal boats, because it was a international code of signaling that everybody would understand. So every day they had a drill.
Oh, my
They would
goodness.
have fire drills, so that in the event that there was a fire in the station, that they could hopefully save the equipment first and then the station second. So yes, they would drill. Now take the breeches buoy. They were required, from the time the keeper said, open the boat windows. The boat room, by the way, was on many of the stations, was a large garage that was attached right to the station where they kept their apparatus. So he would say, open the boat room doors. They would have 5 minutes to haul up the cart out to where they had a drill pole. They had a fake mask on the ship. You had 5 minutes to get the cart to there, get the cart unloaded, get the shot fired, get the lines rigged up, and then one of the surfmen landed on shore. Single. You had 5 minutes to do that. If you did it over 5 minutes, you were considered deficient. And now you had to drill twice a week to get it to under 5 minutes.
So essentially, they would set up sort of a fake breeches buoy.
They had not a fake breeches buoy. They would set up a simulated mast. A simulated mast on the ship. Which was like a platform at the top. And that's what they would do. They would fire the line from that simulated mast, which had 2 arms on it to make it a little bit easier. And then one surfman would go up, and he would haul on the line to make them all fast. And then they would haul the breeches buoy out, he would get in it, and then they would land here.
And
they
that
had to do all that in under 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Good grief. So they were really highly skilled.
And it was a team effort. It had to be a team effort. One person could not do this by themselves. 3 people could not do this by themselves. They needed all 6, and actually the 7th, because you had to be trained also. Each one had a specific job to do. And they would rotate the jobs so everybody was familiar with the other teammates' job.
Right.
But it was an amazing team building exercise of the breeches buoy. It was one of the criticisms when the Coast Guard did away with the breeches buoy was the discontinuing that team effort, because it was really important. Same with the surfboat. It had to be a team to do it.
Yeah.
Not one individual. One individual couldn't do better than another individual. It wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So that's why the drilling was so important.
you, everyone had a specialized function.
Right.
So, and I think it's fascinating that they would all rotate, so everyone would know all the functions in case they had someone who was sick or
Exactly.
incapacitated, or
Exactly.
they could.
Absent or whatever.
Yeah.
And even the winterman, obviously, he had to know them all also, even though he only used them for the wintertime.
Right.
But, yeah.
So, talk to me a little bit more about the crews that served on surf boats.
The crew of the station consisted of the keeper, who was in charge of the station, and 6 surfmen. They were called surfmen. They were ranked by their ability from 1 to 6. Now, unique to New England, and particularly on the Cape, they also, in the wintertime, added a 7th surfman. They actually called him the winterman, because if you do the math, in order to do their patrols during darkness, they needed an extra crew member. Otherwise, somebody would have to do it twice.
Right, because there was just so many more hours in the winter.
And so they had what they call the winterman, the 7th man on the Cape during winter. The crews were required to live at the station full time. They were not allowed to leave unless the keeper of the station would give them the liberty during daylight. They had to be back at night. If they, for any reason, had to leave for more than daylight, over 24 hours, they had to hire a substitute. And they had to pay that substitute out of their own pay.
Gosh.
The government provided the crew a building. They provided the crew a dining room table, the chairs. They provided the crew cooking utensils, coal for heating, bed, a couple of blankets. And other than that, the crew had to buy their own stuff. They had to buy their own food. They had to buy their own uniforms. And if they wanted anything other than what the government provided, they had to buy it. And they would alternate taking turns doing the cooking.
Mm-hmm. Like a fire station kind of today.
However, New Englanders are pretty smart people. And they figured out that one guy was a little better cook than the other. Mm-hmm. And so they would cut a deal with the surfmen and say, okay, you do the cooking and we'll stand your watch.
Oh.
So
that was probably a nice arrangement.
Nice arrangement for them to get, although the regulation did require each man take his turn cooking.
Uh-huh.
But they overlooked that. The administration of the cruise was done by a district superintendent here on the Cape, who was Benjamin Sparrow. And the revenue cutter service officer, the kind of a military inspector of the stations to make sure that they were doing their drills properly, and that they were following the regulations. There were no benefits. There were no medical benefits, and there were no retirement, and they did have a death benefit. And if they died in the line of duty, the widow family would get 1 year's salary. And in a very unusual circumstance, the general superintendent in Washington was authorized to give the widow another year's salary. That was it. So the crews got together and they formed kind of their own insurance company called the Surfers Mutual Benefit Association, which they paid dues to. And in the event of, again, one of them dying, it was an additional compensation to survivors.
So they developed that completely on their own.
They were paid earlier $45 a month. Later on, they were paid $65 a month. There was always competition between the merchants, sailing merchant vessels and things like that. And depending on who paid the most, usually would get the prison. But later on, at $65 a month, which, by the way, did not change right up until the Coast Guard period, through the Coast Guard period, actually. It was pretty good.
That was decent money?
Yeah. However, in 1915, it was found that this whole thing was inefficient because you had keepers of stations that wouldn't leave, wouldn't retire because they wanted the money. they were in their 70s and 80s, and then you had #1 surfman pulling the stroker was a really heavy surf boat in the 60s. That was just not efficient.
Yeah, they simply couldn't afford to retire.
So they merged the revenue cutter service with the life-saving service from the U.S. Coast Guard in 1915, and providing retirement benefits and medical benefits for life-saving. Although the life-saving was a separate branch of the Coast Guard until World War II, they had their own designation. As a chief bosun's mate, there would be an L after his name, parentheses, because they were highly skilled. And then in small boat operations. And then World War II came, and they suddenly realized that they had a tremendous talent of small boat operators in the Coast Guard, and they, of course, put them into all the landing craft in the Pacific, Normandy and places like that. Those landing craft, those were all coxswain line.
Oh my goodness.
Coast Guard. Most of the surfmen.
How interesting.
Because of their
Yeah, they had a
experience.
yeah, they had a special skill with
Surf
that.
and small boat operations. So there was a big talent that they had thanks to the U.S. Life Saving Service and the former earlier part of the Coast Guard.
Yeah. So that's interesting that, they really made a difference in what was probably the most important operation of World War II.
And the surf and the Higgins boats. In fact, if the movie there are pictures of D-Day. It's the Beachmaster. If you look closely at the Beachmaster, he's standing up there with his flags and everything. Notice his headband is Coast Guard.
Really? Tell me a little bit about the surfman's motto.
Surfman's motto was actually, a lot of people think it was a life-saving service. It actually came in the Coast Guard period. That you have to go out. The regulations don't say anything about you coming back. People, I don't think a lot of people realize that is actually in the regulations.
Wow.
I believe it's Article 252, regulations for the life-saving service, Article 24. Don't hold me there, but I think it's Article 24 in the instructions to Coast Guard stations. Basically, what it says is that the keeper of the station, the officer in charge of the station, must use every single available means to save life at a wreck. The comment that I did not use the surf boat because I felt the surf was too high was not underlined and accepted. Regulations say you have to make an attempt. If you think the surf is too high, you still have to make the attempt to launch the boat. Now, if the boat capsizes, the boat gets smashed up, and the boat is thrown back on shore, that's okay. You did your duty. But if you say, nope, I'm not going to do it because the surf's too high, I'm just going to smash the boat, that's not acceptable. If you go to the breaches point, you fire the number 9 line, it doesn't make it. You fire the number 7 line, it doesn't make it. You go to the smallest line, number 4, you fire it with a maximum powder charge, it doesn't quite make it. Go one more. Go one more, even though the maximum authorized powder charge was 6 ounces, go to 8 ounces. Fire it. The line breaks, fire it again. You make every effort to save the life. And after you've tried everything, keep trying.
So the men who served as surfmen were understood that they were putting their own lives at risk. They were putting their lives in peril to do the utmost they could to try to save others.
Absolutely. That was totally understood. The Coast Guard later, after World War II, began to have more of a risk management means of doing that. But the older surfmen, the older officers in charge, they went by that. right there in writing.
How many lives surfmen actually were able to save, and it's really an incredible number.
Now, the U.S. Life Saving Service was period of 50 years ago, 1870 to 1950, when it merged with the Coast Guard. Now, this is just the U.S. Life Saving Service. Saved approximately 178 to 200,000 lives.
That's just
Now,
remarkable.
also, remember the population of the United States is not like it is today. The percentage of population of lives that were saved. This not too well-known organization.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
But you know, I think about being on one of those old wooden ships in a storm and knowing that your boat was going down fast, because many wooden boats could sink in a matter of minutes, and how your heart must have surged when you saw the flare go up from shore and you knew that the surfmen saw you and they were coming to get you.
Well, look at the coastal trading vessels. Let's not talk about the real blue water ones, but the coastal ones, which are the most popular.
Those were all the boats going up and down the northeast coast. Yeah.
You're on a schooner, three-masted schooner. You're on your way from New Jersey or Pennsylvania with a full load of coal on board. And your freeboard is probably down to 4 or 5 feet.
That's the
between
amount
the water and the deck.
Right.
Because of the heavy load of coal. And it's the wintertime. And you're in a northeast storm. And you're on a lee shore. The boat is not as easily maneuverable with that weight on it. And you're getting blown closer and closer and closer to the shore. And there's nothing you can do about it. You can drop an anchor. And they did. No way with that weight behind the anchor that it's going to hold. You know you're going to know. Inevitably, you're going to end up on the bottom. And your only hope is a lifesaver.
Well, an incredible story about an organization that so many people don't know about. So thank you, Richard Boonisar, for